What is up, my YouTube family? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, then it's not welcome back, it's just welcome. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button because you will not be disappointed if you got good taste. So you guys have asked for it, and I'm extremely excited to be doing this video today because y'all know this is my baby. I am thoroughly obsessed with this video concept, and I've already previously explained. But I feel like it's been so long I need to explain again how I was in love with the show Beyond Belief Actor Fiction. As a kid, I used to watch it with my auntie on Friday nights after she got off work every week. And we would watch it together and try to guess which ones were facts or fiction, but we would try to see who got the most right at the end of the show. So I really enjoy these videos, and I'm so happy to be bringing them back. I didn't think y'all really liked them like that, but y'all been asking for them to come back, and so here they are, and here I am, happy to give them to you. I really don't have anything else to get into before we get started. Now, if you're new here and you're unfamiliar with the concept, I'm going to tell you a series of short stories, some of which are based on true events, and at least one is merely a figment of my imagination, right? You have to guess which ones are fact, which ones are fiction. And of course, at the end of the video, I'm going to tell you which ones were real, which ones weren't. Very fun. This time around, though, I'm going to do a theme with each one. So the theme of today's video is unsolved mysteries. And without further ado, let's get into story number one. A small, quiet Midwest town known for farming and agriculture and for being an overall peaceful little place to be is shaken when a very popular and well-known, very well-liked woman is abducted. And well, no one is really sure what happens to her after this. Michelle is a very attractive, very outgoing 20-year-old, very much given life of the party. She and her fiance Greg are high school sweethearts who have recently found out that Michelle is expecting their very first child. Now, after a night out with their friends, Michelle drops Greg off at his parents' house and she proceeds to go home herself. She lets him know that she will call him when she gets home, and as promised, she does so about an hour later, but she does so from a payphone. It is one located in the center of town, and it is not on her way home. Like, she wouldn't have passed this payphone if she had left his house going straight home. But what's more strange is what she has to tell him. An older model blue Ford pickup truck has been following her for miles. And she had been driving aimlessly through the town, making random turns to try to at first confirm that he was following her. But when she realized this, she tried to kind of lose him. She is finally able to shake this truck. However, she has now become a little lost herself. She has no idea where she is. Her phone is dead. She does not have a car charger. And so she had stopped at this payphone to call her boyfriend to let him know what was going on, and to also see if he could try to figure out how she can get home from where she currently is. Greg gives her the directions to get home from where she currently is, and he then tells her to call him once she gets home to let him know that she had made it. But right before she can hang up the phone with Greg, this blue truck pulls up and parks in the parking lot, and the person is just sitting inside. Now, as a safety precaution, Greg advises her to not leave, to remain there on the phone with him, and she does so. Meanwhile, this person gets out of the car and walks up to the payphone, but he does not acknowledge her at all. Instead, he goes to the payphone next to her, messes around with the payphone a bit before walking back to his truck and getting back inside. She's watching him. He is looking at something inside of his truck with a flashlight, and he appears to not be paying her any attention, but all of this just seems too weird. Like, she is not trusting him at all. She's watching him as he shines the light all around his truck, and then all of a sudden he lifts the light up and shines it toward her. This makes her very nervous, and she tells Greg about this, and then he tells her to approach the man and ask him if he needed to use the payphone. Maybe the one that he had walked up to was out of service. The man is very short with her. He tells her no, and that he would try the other phone again in a moment. Meanwhile, Greg is still on the phone waiting on the answer. She tells him, and then he just tells her at that point it is best for her to still remain there on the phone with Greg and not to leave because he might follow her again. They both agree that this is probably her best option. So they continue their conversation. They're talking about random things, and she is trying her best not to look his way, not to pay this strange guy any attention. And as time passes, she gets more and more wrapped up in the conversation. And it gets to the point where she really isn't paying this guy much attention at all. But suddenly, Greg hears Michelle screaming on the other end of the phone. He also hears a bit of like shuffling and struggling. At this point, he gets into his parents' car and he takes off toward the payphone, which is about 7 blocks away from his parents' house. And as he is headed there, an old model Ford pickup truck, blue in color, passes him going in the opposite direction. And as this truck passes his, he hears Michelle scream his name from inside. Now, Greg goes to turn around and make a U-turn to then, of course, go after the truck. But he puts his car in reverse too soon and damages the transmission. Now, despite the damage that has been caused to the car, he is able to follow the truck for 2 miles before the car just quits. It's like, girl, I can't. The transmission completely fails and he loses sight of this blue truck. He calls the police, he gives a statement, and a missing persons report is then filed for Michelle. Her kidnapping sends shockwaves through this small town because, like I said, they're not really used to things like this happening. Large groups form to search for her. A lot of tips are called in from people saying that they spotted this truck here, or they believe that this person might be responsible. None of them turn out to be real leads. They refer to the registration database to narrow down a list of all the people in the area and surrounding areas who own a late model blue Ford pickup truck. And the list is still massive. Over 2,000 people come up in the database. And after checking out every single one and finding nothing, police began to look at Greg as a suspect. Now, their friends and family all vouched for Greg. They felt like he would never do anything like this. He was excited to become a father. He loved Michelle. And this just was not in his character. However, police felt like this was a strange story, and there was literally nothing that could validate any part of it. The only thing that could be validated was that the two of them had attended a party with friends and that they had left together around the time that he claimed that they had. A week after investigators zero in on Greg, he is cleared of any suspicion. Not only was his family on his side advocating for him, but Michelle's family as well. They just did not believe that he would do anything to their daughter. Granted, the police didn't put anything past him. He's actually cleared because they make a connection between her disappearance and 2 other suspicious disappearances that have now happened within a 100-mile radius of where she had disappeared. One of which had occurred 3 months prior. 42-year-old Sabrina Lawson was working alone inside of a convenience store one night when she calls her son to tell him about a suspicious man that had been loitering outside in the parking lot. This man was also driving a truck. In under 10 minutes, her son arrives to the convenience store and it is completely deserted. His mother is gone, there is no truck, there is no man. However, in this instance, 2 days later, she had been found on a riverbank about 10 miles from the store and had been fatally shot execution style. And the second disappearance had occurred about 70 miles from where Sabrina had gone missing. 30-year-old Diane Leslie had vanished from a convenience store that she had been working at late at night. But unlike Sabrina, Diane is not located. She has never been seen or heard from since. And just 3 weeks after this is when Michelle had gone missing from the payphone. And so investigators are believing that all of these are connected. They do their best to investigate. They also follow each and every lead that is called into them, but unfortunately they lead to nowhere, and so eventually the case goes cold. Then several months later, they receive an anonymous tip that provides them with a potential explanation as to what had happened to Michelle. This anonymous caller claims that Michelle had been mistaken for a different Michelle who was being targeted to get revenge on her father. The Michelle that was meant to be kidnapped is the daughter of an informant who received multiple threats to his daughter's life if he had continued to cooperate with police, which he had. The timeline matches up perfectly, as well as the description of the 2 girls. But unfortunately, even with this new information, as of 2021, it is still being investigated. However, they are no closer to solving the crime than they were back in 1991 when it occurred. On to story number 2. In the wee hours of the morning, on a cold winter night, 30-year-old John Derry is driving along a U.S. highway when, without warning, a man stumbles onto the snow-covered highway directly in front of his vehicle. Unable to avoid him, John's car immediately collides with this man, sending him flying more than 40 feet down the road ahead. Immediately, John dials 911, but in the meantime, he runs to be by this man's side to attempt to render some kind of first aid, but he quickly realizes the severity of his injuries are far beyond his little set of Boy Scout skills. No shade to the Boy Scouts. And not only that, there are some things going on with this man that make John take a step back in horror. It's very apparent that not all of his injuries are a result of this accident. Now, when police and paramedics arrive on the scene, they can tell that the bulk of his injuries are consistent with being hit by a car. Multiple broken bones, his neck is broken. There's a lot of internal bleeding and trauma to the chest, as well as his legs and torso. But in addition to these things, this man's hands are bound behind his back with rope. He's missing one shoe. His eyes and his mouth are both covered in several layers of 2-inch surgical tape. And there are lacerations on both of his ankles, suggesting that at some point he had been bound at the ankles as well. And it just gets a little bit stranger because when the tape is removed from his mouth, they recover a handkerchief that had been lodged into his throat, and when they open it up, it has lipstick stains on it. The man is very quickly identified as 40-year-old Avery Wilkins, a widower and a father of 4. Sadly, he never regains consciousness and succumbs to his injuries on the way to the hospital. So they are then left with the task of informing his family. They send officers to inform his family. Meanwhile, other officers canvass the area to try to gather enough evidence to paint the picture of what could have possibly happened to this man. Like, where did you come from? Now, following his footprints in the snow, police are able to determine that it's very likely that he'd been dropped off there by a vehicle about 140 feet away from where he had been struck by the car. And they're able to tell this by the tire marks that they find where his footsteps had begun in the snow. Afterward, whoever had been driving the vehicle had backed up and then driven off in a different direction. To them, it seemed as though he had been dropped off, completely bound, and at some point he was able to get one of his feet loose, which would explain why the one shoe was off and he was no longer bound at the ankles, and that he had stumbled close to the road. But judging by the lacerations on the bottom of his feet, they suspect that he had wandered around in the wooded area for quite some time before making it to the highway. But what's more perplexing, though, is the fact that there is not just one set of footprints. There is a parallel set of footprints, suggesting that whomever had dropped him off had also followed him around for a little while, watching him wander around helplessly. Now, one working theory is that the person had actually led him toward the road in hopes that he would get hit by a car and possibly watched it happen before leaving. Now, the officers that are sent to his home found his 4 sons there who had gone to bed for the night, and they say that the last time they had seen and spoken to their father was just a few hours before, right before they had gone to bed at about 10 p.m. Literally that same evening. His sons have no knowledge of any enemies that would want to do this to him. Literally no one that disliked him or he had any trouble with. They didn't know of any scorned lovers or literally anyone that would want to bring any harm to their father. Police then checked the home for any signs of forced entry, believing that he had been forced out of the home, maybe against his will. But when they had arrived at the home, the front door was locked. All of the windows are locked, back door locked. And a very thorough search reveals that there was no forced entry into the home. It seems as if he had left the home for whatever reason and had run into trouble after the fact. And what had happened after the fact? They continued their investigation, speaking with friends, family members, co-workers, literally any and everybody that has any kind of connection to this man, and literally no one has anything to offer that is helpful to their investigation. There's no evidence at the house. His car was still there, which is also odd. And the very few people that police bring in as suspects have an alibi that completely checks out. And in addition to their alibis checking out, they take lie detector tests, which they pass. And although police have continued this investigation and they continue to question and interview people, no arrests have been made, and this bizarre case of this man stumbling onto the highway tied up is never solved. On to story number 3. Diane Stevens is a 21-year-old student at Tennessee State University in hopes of becoming a teacher, and she is also working at the library part-time. Now, on Friday, her good friend Brianna pulls up to the library where she works. The two are very close friends, but they had not seen each other in a while, and finally, they had made plans to hang out and catch up. Nothing too crazy, just, get together, do what the girls do, grab a drink, maybe flirt with some men down at the bar. And Brianna waits outside for Diane for about 20 minutes past the time that she told her she'd be off. Now, at first, she doesn't think anything is strange. She just figures that maybe her friend is working late. However, she has watched literally everyone come out of the library, and when the last person comes out and locks the doors, she becomes a little bit concerned. She inquires about Diane and is told that she had left about an hour or so before, headed home for the night. Now, Brianna brushes this off, believing that maybe Diane had forgot about their little plans. Or maybe she had an emergency. Maybe something came up. She sends her friend a text. She gets no response. 2 days later, Diane's friends become concerned when they realize that no one has heard from her since she had reportedly left the library that Friday evening. She had clocked out at 9:59, 1 minute before her shift was to end, but she had not made it back to her dorm room that night. She is reported missing at 11:30 p.m. on Sunday evening. Authorities search her room for any type of clues. All of her clothes are still there. Her suitcase is still there, along with her last uncashed paycheck and seemingly all of her other belongings. So it was completely bizarre, and it didn't look that she had gone off on her own voluntarily. Now, despite her friends and family's concern, police do not initially suspect any foul play. They had actually been told by Brianna that Diane had been seeing someone from a neighboring state, so police figured that despite all of these belongings being left behind, she had just gone off to visit him maybe for a weekend, and none of this stuff was anything that she would need. Her parents combat these claims because, to their knowledge, their daughter is single and she is not seeing anyone. But according to Brianna, Diane's parents are very strict, very judgmental, and this man that she had been seeing is technically married, although he's separated from his wife. And because of that, she had not shared the details of their relationship with anyone else. She had only confided in Brianna. Now, it takes a little bit of digging all up in her business, but they are able to locate this boyfriend of hers, and he tells police that he had not seen her and that he had actually been looking for her himself. At this point, police take her disappearance a little bit more serious, but they're still unable to find her. And 9 days after she had last been seen at the library, 3 teens are on their way to a party when they stop at a cornfield and stumble across the body of a young woman laying there in the field face up. They immediately drive to the nearest police station to report this discovery, and the body is positively identified as Diane. She is barefoot, and although she is clothed, the clothes are different than what she had reportedly last been seen in. Like, way different. Her shoes, her purse, and the trench coat that she had last been seen in leaving her job are never recovered, and it's unclear whether or not the jacket that she currently has on even belongs to her. They are able to determine that she had been alive at least for 48 hours beyond her disappearance, and pathologists determined that she had been suffocated either with a pillow or a plastic bag. Diane did not show any signs of physical violence, which to them is an indicator that she had likely known her attacker. But the most bizarre discovery that they make is that Diane had eaten an abnormal amount of potatoes right before she died. Like 6 pounds of potato. Now, Diane's boyfriend lives alone in an apartment near the location where she had been discovered, and Brianna points him out to be this very possessive jerk who definitely should be looked at as a suspect. She had recently told Brianna that she wanted to break things off with him, which would give him motive for wanting to harm her. And Brianna believes that this conversation may have happened and had gone left. Authorities zero in on the boyfriend as their prime suspect. And once he realized that he is in their crosshairs, he attempts to unalive himself, but he is unsuccessful in doing so. He then hires a lawyer, and the lawyer says that he had not done that because he was guilty, and that he actually done it due to the emotional disturbance brought on by this bizarre loss of his girlfriend. Now, do police believe this? No, but there is not enough evidence to charge him or anyone else with Diane's murder, and it remains an unsolved mystery until this day. Alright, last but not least, story number 4. Halloween night of 2003, Marcus and Tiara, a couple that have been together since sophomore year of high school, and are currently in their college junior year, leave an off-campus Halloween party around 2:30 a.m., headed back to their respective dorm room. Now, they had planned on staying at the party later. However, when Marcus gets into a little scuffle with his best friend, Tiara decides that it is time for them to go. Now, Marcus is known to get a little rowdy when he's had a few drinks. And Tiara has plans to spend the weekend with her mother, who lives about 3 hours away. She didn't want to leave the party too late anyway because her plan was to arrive at her parents' house early Saturday morning. On Sunday night, Tiara reaches out to Marcus's roommate because over the weekend she has not been able to reach her boyfriend. And now his phone is going straight to voicemail, and this is unlike him. The roommate tells her that he has not seen Marcus since the two of them had left for the party Friday evening, which Tiara thinks is strange because the two of them had rode together back to campus. He had dropped her off in front of her dorm building, and to her knowledge, he had then gone to his. Tiara then asked his roommate to let her know if he shows up, and although he sounds very uninterested and irritated by her request, he agrees to do so. He and Marcus had a very tumultuous relationship, very toxic. They share a dorm and don't even speak. The roommate, Chris, is actually on the waiting list for a transfer, but unfortunately, student housing is pretty full and does not seem to be prioritized in his situation, which is to get away from Marcus ASAP. Tiara then reaches out to a few more of Marcus's friends, and no one has seen or heard from Marcus since they left the party on Friday. She has someone go and check for his car. It is in the parking space. There are his keys and his wallet inside of the center console, along with his cell phone, which is charged but powered off. Police are called, a missing persons report is filed, and when investigators get to digging, they end up with more questions than they started with. Now, according to Tiara, they had made a stop at a gas station on their way home because he needed gas. And then, of course, she had been dropped off in front of her dorm building. Goes to her parents' house as she had planned. She is texting Marcus. He's not responding, and she's thinking that he's upset with her for making him leave the party earlier than he would like to. But then she called him, and his phone was going to voicemail, which was weird. Now, surveillance of the gas station shows that what she said was true. They had really stopped at a gas station. They see Marcus pumping the gas while Tiara goes into the store and purchases an energy drink. Now, as Marcus is pumping gas, he receives a phone call, which he accepts, but he ends as soon as Tiara comes out of the store. Next, they attempt to get a statement from the roommate, Chris, but he is extremely hard to get a hold of. There is no answer when they come to the dorm room. They leave a card for him to call down to the station. He never does. And when they finally catch up with Chris, he is very standoffish and not really all that much help. All he really has to offer is the same thing that he had told Tiara, that he had not seen Marcus since the two of them left to go to the party together. And he maintains that Marcus never came back. They check Marcus's phone records to see who it was that he had spoken to when he was at the gas station. And it turns out that it is the best friend that he had the disagreement with at the party. They also see that a second call had taken place that night between this same friend and Marcus. But the second call was an outgoing call from Marcus to the friend at 3:12 a.m. And this call had only lasted 6 seconds. Now, when they speak to this friend, he says that he had felt bad about engaging in fisticuffs with Marcus, knowing that he was only being a jerk because he was intoxicated. And he says that he had only called him to smooth things over and apologize. Now, Marcus accepted his apology but kind of brushed him off the phone, and he had not heard from him since. So he figured that Marcus was still upset about the fight. Now, when they asked him about this second call that had taken place, he tells them that he had not spoken to Marcus a second time that night. and that a second call had to have been like a butt dial or on accident. Now, things get a little bit more strange when Tiara's roommate reveals that Tiara had not returned to their dorm room that night either. And she was absolutely sure because it was Halloween night and she and her boyfriend were up till 4 a.m. watching movies. Police circle back to ask Tiara about this because they think it's kind of odd that she did not mention that she didn't go back to her dorm room either. And at this point, she reveals a tidbit of information that she had previously left out, which is that on the way home, she and Marcus had argued about what had happened at the party. And by the time that he had dropped her off, she was completely wide awake and had decided to go ahead and make the drive to her parents' house that night. When she had previously spoken to police, she had told them that she had arrived at her parents' house Saturday morning at 8 a.m. If it was a 3-hour drive and you left that night, there are some hours in between unaccounted for. But for this, she has an explanation as well. She says that about an hour into that drive, her adrenaline had worn off from the fight and she had gotten sleepy. But instead of turning back, she decides to pull over and take a nap alongside the road. And a few hours later, she had woken up and finished her drive, putting her there at her parents' house at 8 a.m. When they ask her why not drink the energy drink that you purchased at the convenience store, she tells them that she had purchased it to drink it in the morning for her drive, and she didn't want to drink it that night to throw off her sleep pattern. Now, they are able to confirm that she had headed toward her parents' house via toll records and that there were several hours unaccounted for. Now, whether or not these hours were really spent sleeping on the side of the road, they cannot tell, but they cannot prove that she had anything to do with Marcus disappearing. Neither can they disprove anything that she's telling them. They take a closer look at the roommate Chris as a potential suspect, but again, there is no evidence to prove foul play or that anything had transpired between he and Chris that night. Another theory of theirs was that he had met up with the best friend after dropping Tiara off. Maybe he wanted to go back to the party because he wasn't ready to go home and that something had transpired between the two of them. But again, this is yet another theory that they have no proof of. And unfortunately, they hit a brick wall in their investigation and the case has never been solved. All right, let's see how you did. Story number 1 with Michelle, who is 20. Newly pregnant and vanishes from a payphone while on the phone with her boyfriend. If you guessed that this story really happened, you would be correct. This actually did happen in 1991 in Clinton, Missouri. The young lady's name was not Michelle, though. It was Angel Hammond. Trudy Darby was the 42-year-old woman that had gone missing and was found. And Cheryl Ann Kinney is the third woman who had gone missing and unfortunately has never been found. So if you guessed that that really happened, you're correct. Story number 2 about the man who had stumbled onto the highway, blindfolded, mouth taped, and bound at the wrist. If you guessed that this story was false and was a figment of my imagination, then you would be wrong. This story actually, unfortunately, did happen in December of 1939, and the victim's name was Stefan Melke. Story number 3 about the young lady who worked at the library and who had gone missing to be later found with 6 pounds of potato in her stomach. If you guessed that this really happened, you would be correct. This, unfortunately, is the true story of Donna Susan Dahl of Brookfield, Illinois. Last but not least, story number 4 of Tiara and Marcus. If you guessed that this one was true, you would be wrong. This one was just made up on a whim. And that will conclude today's video. I want to know which stories you thought were fact and which ones you thought were fiction. So let me know down below. Don't forget to like this video, share with a friend, subscribe if you have not yet subscribed. And as always, I appreciate you so much for spending your time with me. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Peace. My hair, I'm hungry. She and her friend, they receive a lot of tips when without warning a man stumbles upon but he quickly Boy Scout skips Boy Scout without a C, girl. We're just gonna check the C out. There is a lot of internal breeding, girl, not internal breeding. Police are then left with the task. Okay, the officers that are sent to his phone. What? Diane Stevens is a 21-year-old studying. I can't talk. Lord. But the most bizarre, girl.